p.m. It's the 5th of October. And welcome along to this special Ask TCW Live. Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Ask TCW special podcast. Joining me this evening is Andy Haywood.
Evening.
Tina Taylor.
Hello.
And our special guest this week, who we are delighted to say has joined us, is Dr Victoria Silverwood, criminologist and lecturer at Birmingham City University. Hello and welcome, Victoria.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us. You're here to talk about Ice Guardians and just fighting in general in ice hockey. For people that don't know, just if you could just let us know what your role was in the Ice Guardians documentary.
Okay. My role in Ice Guardians was to be interviewed relating to my research that I had conducted in the Elite League on the culture and practice of violence in professional hockey. There haven't been many lengthy academic research papers written about fighting in hockey. I think this is the first from the criminological sort of background. Because Ice Guardians is quite a thinking man's documentary, or thinking person, I should say, is documentary. They were really keen to get academic research to go alongside the player accounts of fighting. So they asked me to go to Vancouver and be filmed, and I was thrilled to do so. And then after that, I'm now currently writing a book on a very similar topic with the writer and director of the film, Brett Harvey.
I mean, how was it going over to Vancouver and being a part of this documentary? That must have been a just amazing experience.
Oh, it was brilliant. I was on holiday when I got a Twitter message from the producer, Adam Scorgi, saying, would I have the time if they were to fly me over to Vancouver, to go to Vancouver and be filmed and, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, twist my arm. I really wouldn't want to go and spend time in the best city on earth. So, so I was very excited. And it was shortly after I'd had my final sort of PhD marking and been kind of fully qualified. So it was really exciting to be able to go over there for a few days and be filmed. I'd had the film on my radar for quite a while. They've been tweeting about it for a few years before they started all the filming. So I've kind of been aware of it, but it was really exciting to be involved.
I can imagine. Now, if anybody would like to get in touch with us this evening during our live podcast, then you can do. The hashtag is AskTCW and our Twitter handle is @CatsWhiskersTV. If you've got any questions for Andy, Tina, myself, or if you've got an in-depth question for Victoria on the Ice Gardens or maybe fighting, then please do get in touch. Now, for the people that don't know, obviously Ice Guardians is a feature-length documentary taking an in-depth look into the history and role of an NHL enforcer, and it features obviously Nottingham Panthers current player Brian McGrattan and ex-Belfast Giant Kevin Westgarth, amongst many others. Now, Victoria, one of the questions that we had in was, do you know any more about the premiere that's supposedly happening in Nottingham soon?
I do, actually. We've had some discussions today about it. The Broadway Cinema is really keen to show it. So we're just trying to finalise an absolute date. And then it will be shown there with a Q&A after the documentary with, obviously, Brian McGrattan, myself, and I imagine he'll bring a few other interesting people along as well.
And obviously you went over to Toronto last month for the premiere over there. Toronto, another great city. How was that? And how's it been taken over the pond? Has it been well received?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it was really, really exciting to see it there, because obviously it's much more of a hockey town. So there was a real buzz. It was during the Toronto International Film Festival, where Goon 2 was also premiered as well.
Okay. So
there were quite a few people, sort of hockey people, around the area. it's quite well known and people are quite excited. It's already had over 2 million. The trailer itself has had more than 2 million views on YouTube. So people were sort of beginning to sort of get the buzz, and it was a sold out premiere, so red carpet premiere. So it was really exciting event.
I can imagine, and I imagine over here when that showing happens in Nottingham, there'll be quite a few fans that want to go and see it as well. Now, Andy, I believe you have a question for Victoria.
Yes.
Can you remember your question?
No.
Okay, I'll ask the question on behalf of Andy, Victoria. And Andy would like to know, what is your stance on fighting in hockey?
Do you know what? I always get asked that question, and I always feel like I should have a really nice, neat stance on it. My view on it changes all the time. Initially, when I started doing my research, I was a fan of hockey. It was something I was already really interested in. As time changed, certainly after you started to be aware of the kind of the suicides of 2011, of more awareness of concussions, I became a little bit more cautious until an actual fight started, in which case everything takes over again and you get very excited about it and you kind of want to know why it's happened and what's going on. My views kind of further changed by the fact that my son started playing junior hockey now, so I'm a little bit more cautious about him injuring himself. But my stance, and you'll see sort of this really kind of well laid out in Ice Guardians by the filmmakers, that actually only 95% of concussions 95% are caused by general body contact, by the speed of the game. Only 5% are caused by fighting. So I kind of remind myself of that when I'm a little bit cautious about what they might be doing to their brains.
Right. Okay, that's quite an amazing stat, actually. I mean, Andy,
apologies. I did ask that question. I didn't realise I was going to be asking that question.
Well, I wanted to give you the floor, but never mind with that. But obviously, with the stat that Victoria's just mentioned there, does that surprise you, Andy, regarding that kind of, that it's just the speed of the game that maybe causes more injuries?
No, not at all, to be brutally honest. I think realistically, you look at a lot of the more competitive sports, yes, concussion is a buzzword, but realistically, the big sports that have the big concussion issues at the moment are seemingly the hockey and the American football, and rugby, obviously, over here in this country. It is an issue, but realistically, all the ones that are getting concussed tend to be from high impacts rather than punches. And you've got to think as well, as much as they are punching each other, a lot of the times, you're looking at they're hitting helmets, they're hitting the side of the face, they're hitting the side of the heads, but they're not really connecting a great deal of every single punch is thrown out on the ice. So no, I'm actually not surprised by that statistic at all.
I mean, obviously, regarding the helmet issue, if we look back to our game just last Saturday against the Manchester Storm, obviously Eric Nielsen took off his helmet, Brian McGrattan kept that on. Victoria, I mean, do you think taking off, I mean, it might sound a bit of a stupid question really, but do you think the ruling that they now have in the NHL where you're not allowed to take your helmet off helps that situation if they're the correct words?
It's a complicated situation, and I'm not sure. I know there has been some discussion about whether McGrattan thought he would receive an additional penalty for removing his helmet, or whether he decided to keep it on as protection. It's always been kind of part of the code of kind of respect and honour that you'd kind of take your helmet off in order to respect your opponent's knuckles. But the reality is, you have your helmet there for a reason. You have it there to protect your head. So as long as there's some kind of agreement between the combatants about whether, they know you're going to keep your helmet off or whether they know you're going to take it off, I think it's up to the individual player's choice. And there's certainly no more kind of loyalty or righteousness in taking your helmet off than there is in keeping it on.
I mean, just on that, I saw on Twitter Chris Ellis, who's obviously been heavily involved with elite ice hockey over the years, said that actually Eric Nielsen got a 2-minute unsportsmanlike conduct, and that was because he took his helmet off. But I mean, Tina, just very quickly, we saw that had an effect, didn't it, on the fight, to be honest, because, you know, Nielsen took a lot of bombs from McGrattan.
Yeah, he did. I don't know really. I don't know if it had. Yeah, I suppose it did have an effect on the fight because, you know, Nielsen's having to try and, you know, pick out the softer areas, if you will, with his punches. And like, you know, like Victoria said, it was, you know, you've sort of got an issue of you know, protecting the knuckles, which, you know, obviously with the visors that are compulsory in this league, you know, for everybody, and, you know, the whole, you know, helmets issue, it does, I suppose, yeah, it sort of makes McGrattan possibly feel a little bit more protected in that sense. So yeah, maybe he had a little bit more free reign about, you know, his fighting style than Nielsen was able to have.
Okay, I will say thank you very much to Andy, whoever he is, for sending in that question. Moving on to another question we've had from Jono Bullard. And he asks, Victoria, do you see a time when fighting will be completely banned from the game?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that's the direction it's going in. You see it certainly coming up from junior hockey, OHL sort of level in the States, where initially there was a 10 fight limit per season. Now this year, the first year, it'll be three fight limit before you receive additional suspensions. You know, that's going to have an effect because if it's going to harm your team, cause you to be a player down for longer term, you're less likely to tackle things in that way. I don't know how long it'll take to go through. Obviously, the AHL's changed a lot this year by incorporating the 10 fight rule as well. I think gradually, perhaps even next year or the year after, it'll go up to the NHL, and you'll see that a lot more. There's certainly been a kind of sea change in it. I personally think they're kind of throwing fighting under the bus as being the big problem, when actually there are bigger problems in terms of equipment and speed. But that's obviously the direction they're going in, and once you start down that road, you're going to end up with an eventual sort of ban of it.
I mean, we've seen obviously it dwindle down, and because we are now getting, you know, your Kevin Westgarths, your Brian McGrattans, your Cam Janssens for us last year coming over into Europe. Do you see that still in the European game, especially the Elite League? Obviously, do you see that those kind of enforcers will still come over here for the next 2-3 years? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, I mean, depending on how the Elite League decide to deal with it, if they tend to take the sort of soft approach with a sort of just a 5-minute penalty, then we'll be another 5 years or so where players who've kind of trained for that role but unable to do it in North America will come over to the UK. Mainland Europe is much higher suspensions for that kind of behaviour in a way. So it will tend to be the UK, I think, that will profit from that if you see it as a profit.
I mean, Tina, obviously last year with Cam, and we saw it on Saturday with McGrattan, that, you know, the crowd in Nottingham, they do like that aspect of the game. They do like to see a fight, don't they?
Yeah, I think with, you know, hockey still being quite a minority sport, you've got, you know, there's a lot of people who do come to the rinks, you know, because they want to see a fight. I mean, I took my two sisters to their first hockey game a few years back, and, you know, all the way up there, they were sort of grilling me. Oh, do you think there'll be a fight? Do you think there'll be a fight? I mean, we were going up to Sheffield, so I was fairly confident that there was going to be one, and there was. It was, I think, on the night it was Colt King and Guy Lepine. So yeah, it definitely happened. And I mean, their perception of fighting wasn't quite what it ended up being. The fight happened, and everybody, you know, it sort of subsided, it died down. You know, guys went in the box for their 5 minutes, and my sister just looked at me, just like open mouthed, and, you know, jaws hit the floor, and said, "We didn't think it was going to be a real fight." And so they thought it was just going to be a sort of a handbaggy type session. I was like, no, they actually do punch each other. And that, for a moment, when they'd sort of got over the shock of that, they found that quite exciting. They said, well, you know, and one of my sisters actually said something that I found quite, I don't know what the word is, but one of them actually said, well, it gets the aggression out, doesn't it? And then they go and sit in time out for a little bit. So I mean that would be for me. I think because as Victoria says, I think it's probably inevitable that fighting is going to be almost the scapegoat of hockey injuries. It probably is going to be on its way out, but I think it'll be a bit of a shame because you sort of see in other sports when players are getting agitated with each other, and you get a bit of pushing and shoving, and there's this sort of there is this sort of come on then mentality, and in hockey that come on then turns into a fight, and like my sister said, they get it all out of their system, and they go and sit down for a few minutes and think about what they've done. So I mean in that aspect, I think we're probably going to miss a decent part of what's become part of the game. But yeah, I think fans in this country are still at the point. I think a lot of fans in this country are still at the point where we do like to see a good scrap. But when I say a good scrap, I mean a fight that is even between two willing combatants, and that's the only way really to see a fight, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that question, Jono.
Sorry, John. Aaron, sorry, I got one more question. Yep. One more thing to relate to that.
Okay.
Back in 2010, I did an online survey which a lot of Panthers fans completed for me, as well as other EIHL and EPL fans, and it came with 97.3% of UK EIHL and EPL fans said that it would affect their likelihood of going to another hockey game if fighting was removed from the sport altogether. So the UK audience are far more keen on the physicality of the game than perhaps a Canadian or North American audience.
I could say, is there a similar study that's been conducted with a North American audience, or even like a portion of the North American audience?
Yeah, not similar sort of research methods, but it's in traditional hockey areas. Obviously, all of Canada, northeast of America, USA. They don't need it as much. But certainly non-hockey towns where you've got, your three teams in California, Florida teams, they expect that kind of behaviour. They want the physicality of the game. That's part of their reasons for attending when they've not grown up with hockey in the same way that those in Canada have.
The problem is, for me, it's the aspect of self-policing. You know that if you're wronged by somebody during a game, you can self-police it, and it's something that the leagues have sort of taken a stance with the instigator rule to try and clamp down on that. But by the same token, it's kind of led to the more nasty sort of plays. I mean, it's pre-season in the NHL, and the other day, I think it was a Philadelphia player, absolutely nailed a guy on the back of his numbers, face first into the boards. And he's not been suspended for it. And I appreciate it's pre-season. I appreciate it's one of them things where it's a split-second decision. But the guy's got history. He's got previous in it. He's made a dirty hit, and they've not punished it. And yet they look at like you say, or like Tina said, throwing the word scapegoat. It does seem to be that the fighting is going to be made a scapegoat, when really it's the things like that. It's the self-policing aspect of it, for me, that needs to come back, that will make the game safer.
Absolutely, and that's something that you'll find hockey players will tell you, both ones that play in the UK, but also sort of North America, those that have played in mainland Europe will say it's a lot dirtier when there is no threat of a fight, when there's no one there policing it. There's a lot more hookings, a lot more all the kind of nasty penalties that are more likely to be injurious. Because no one is there to account for it.
I mean that does lead us on to our next question, actually, and they ask, how would it affect the game itself if fighting were banned altogether? And they mention, would we see the rise of the agitator role even bigger? And obviously over in the Elite League, there's some great agitators. But do you see, Victoria, then, as you were just mentioning, that if fighting was banned, that those hooking calls, all those minor calls as they're known, would increase and potentially even cause more damage?
Yeah, I mean, referees will often tell you that they'd rather there be a fight involved. They'd rather they be able to police it themselves, and it is kind of a key part of the game. Not all referees, but obviously a proportion of them. Certainly, ones we had Nathan Ormond, who's EIHA official, came to the film premiere in London, and he was mentioning, how it's really important to be able to have that aspect of the game. If it's fair, if it's equal, if it's all agreed upon, the referee just can't see everything. So you're going to get more sly, tactical hits and changes if you're not allowed that instigator role. And in fact, in Ice Guardians, they kind of touched on this a lot in terms of concussions. You look at Crosby and how much time he's missed because he had a concussion. Now, if he'd had an enforcer the way Gretzky did on his line, if he'd had somebody there to kind of protect him, perhaps he wouldn't have had repeated targeting effects. Maybe they would have been less likely to be targeted and therefore less likely to suffer with concussion.
I mean, obviously, Andy and Tina, I'll ask both of you this question. Big NHL fans, both have your teams in the NHL. How would you feel if that kind of was? I know it's been taken away slowly, as we've discussed already. But how do you think if that was completely banned in those enforcers that your teams have had over the years were just wiped out? How does that make you feel about the NHL hockey? Would you still have that love for it, or do you see it as part of why you got into hockey and into NHL hockey? And I'll come to Andy first.
Well, I think realistically, it will be the best part of 10 years probably until it goes. And the reason why I think that is because obviously it will keep dwindling and getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they can put these rules in, but ultimately there is still that natural reaction where if you see one of your teammates or you see yourself gets hit badly or there's some sort of discrepancy over something, then straight away someone's going to steam in and look for the retribution, and that will take a lot of time to sort of kill out. I think eventually it probably will do, and they might look at bringing in these 3-fight rules and reducing it even lower still. But I think for now, I don't think it will change too much. I don't know. I don't know if it will change in the long term, and I don't obviously know how that will affect my passion for my NHL team.
I mean, Tina, I hope you don't mind me saying that you are a Boston Bruin.
I am, yes.
Very physical team, like to play with that edge. I mean, how do you see teams like yours adapting to the fact that fighting is dwindling out of the game and potentially might be banned completely?
Well, I think to a certain extent, the Bruins have done that already. I mean, the last sort of out-and-out enforcer we had on our team was Sean Thornton, and we didn't renew his contract two or three seasons ago, and he's been down in Florida ever since. I mean, he was like a 6-minute a night guy, which you can't really have that. I mean, he wasn't very versatile. He didn't have much to offer. He was a decent enough hockey player, but he just didn't contribute enough to the team in the modern sort of.
To be fair, the year you won the playoffs, his fourth line was incredible.
Yeah, the fourth line was incredible, but mostly in part to Daniel Payet and Gregory Campbell. And I'm absolutely devastated. I still haven't got over the loss of those two. But with the sort of with the loss of us letting Sean Thornton go, I think that was the last, sort of proper enforcer. I mean, the next guy I would sort of look to in the sense of fighting. I mean, we've let him go as well. Was Milan Lucic?
Yeah.
But he was he was sort of one of our top line guys, and he had it all. He was an all rounder. He could fight. He could score. Lay on monster hits, and he was the line that he was on was pretty good when he was with us. He was sort of paired up with David Krejci for pretty much all the Boston Bruins career of his that I saw. Now, you're sort of getting on to if fighting if inevitably when it gets seen out in the NHL, it makes me think that it will lead to guys like Brad Marchand having an absolute field day, because I mean he's one of those guys that if he was on any other team, I would hate him. I know I would. I would absolutely hate him because he gets right under guys' skin. And if there is nobody to, just give him a look, or just to have a word and just say, you need to pack that in, sunshine, otherwise I'm going to make you, then he can do whatever he wants, and as long as he's not being he's not being seen by the referees, or he's not doing anything that attracts the attention of the NHL Department of Player Safety, then he's getting away with an awful lot. I can see that happening. So I think like Andy said, the self-policing aspect is it means that guys like Marchand haven't got anybody to answer to, and they can do whatever they like.
I mean, Tina brings up the word referees, and you mentioned about referees earlier, Victoria, saying that 9 times out of 10 they'd rather a fight took place, because that's then they don't have to not deal with it, but it's dealt with on the ice and by the players themselves. Do you think that if fighting gets banned completely, that the refs are then under even more pressure, and even the DOPS departments as well? Do you think it puts more pressure on them to police the game on top of what they have to do already?
Yeah, I mean, the referees know that their role is to keep an eye on the puck, keep an eye on the play. The linesmen are obviously running their lines, but if you're going to be having to watch someone like Brad Marchand or anyone like that constantly, you're going to need an additional person just to keep an eye on someone like that. And if the players can't sort of retaliate or police the game at all, you certainly will see the referees themselves and the officials, having more problems, which will undoubtedly then lead to more reviews, more DOPS, and issues like that, because the kind of sort of blindside hits that have sort of certainly increased as fighting has decreased are going to take up a lot more time for DOPS than a fair fight would have done.
Can I just jump in with something? Sorry, just before you move on, if that's what you're intending to do, Aaron. I mean, just something that's come to mind. I mean, from what I was talking about earlier, that when I took my sisters to the game and they were saying, it gets all the aggression out, and and then they just sort of go and sit down. I mean, just something I wanted to bring up. I mean, if we go back to last season, and we had all the furore that came with Tyson Marsh's hit on Brad Moran. When we knew Tyson Marshall was going to be playing in the game at the NIC, there was going to be the inevitable fight. I mean, you could feel the NIC just waiting for it to happen. And I know this is not a good example to use in terms of what we're talking about in terms of concussions and such, but when the fight had happened, everybody's sort of up into a bit of a frenzy. Yeah, Cam, he's sort of settled the books, as it were, but you could just sort of feel there was a bit more of a relaxed atmosphere in the arena, because everybody was just so hyped for that fight, and you just knew it was going to happen. And and after that, it was all sort of settled, done and dusted, and everybody got on with the game. So I think there's a certain amount of tension that is dissipated when a fight is highly anticipated. I think after it's happened, you get a bit more of a relaxed attitude, and right, let's get on with the game now then.
Well, the best example of that on the flip side of what you've just said, Tina, would be the Panthers Hull game in Hull when Rick Kozak returned from his 6-game suspension. So, for those that don't know, he sucker punches Mark Levers and then punches him while he's lying face down on the ice in the back of the head and splits his head open. He gets chucked out of the game and then kicks Mark Levers' blood towards the Panthers bench as he's skating off. He gets a 6-game suspension, which also happens to be his first game back happens to be at home against Panthers. Now, opening face-off, it's much anticipated that it's going to kick off, and sure enough, Kozak's on the ice for opening face-off. Rumen Nadur's on the ice for Panthers for the opening face-off. The puck's dropped. Rumen drops his gloves, takes his helmet off, skates over to him, and Kozak doesn't want to know. He refuses to fight. So he gets chased around the ice for a bit by Nadur before he finally gives up. But then for the rest of the game, Kozak is just cheap-shotted one after the other by literally every single Panthers player. I mean, it got to the stage where it eventually sort of kicked off properly when Jay Galbraith literally like clotheslines him. And you just sort of, for me, I just feel that, yes, you might still have had a couple of extra digs that day, but if he'd have had the fight off the opening face-off, everything would have settled down and it wouldn't have turned into this almost like a circus like it was.
It's interesting.
Sorry, Victor.
Sorry.
No, go on.
It's interesting in that one because, obviously there is an element, and that's, I think, probably the element that will go out of the IHL straight away, or sooner than the rest, will be the face-off fights. They sort of seem to be sort of keen to get rid of that kind of element first, sort of more of the performance sort of element. Going back to the Marsh incident, though, because I kind of looked at that a lot, sort of quite an interesting one for me. Obviously, Marsh suffered quite a bad concussion from that, which is unusual in fighting comparatively. The interesting thing for that is if you look at the code that, the unwritten code that players will talk about, Marsh had already paid his penalty for having a fight for that bad check, which, admittedly was a pretty shocking check. That he'd already paid his penalty by having a fight during that original game. So the additional one from Janssen at the following game when it was in Nottingham was kind of built up to this kind of big thing that people came in order to watch the retribution. So according to the code, he'd already paid his punishment. He'd had a fight. That should have been the end of it. It was built up. Fans wanted it. Players obviously wanted retaliation as well. And you ended up with a fight that, had it not ended the way it did, would have been perfectly acceptable, but actually ended up being quite a dramatic sort of end to it, a sort of career-ending problem for Marsh. Again,
another side to that though was the fact that a lot of fans, and myself included, felt almost cheated by DOPS with the fact that the ban wasn't as severe as we'd hoped for Tyson Marsh, and then the fact that Cardiff had the cheek to appeal it, and he was able to play in a 3-3, but while they were appealing the decision, while they were playing in Scotland. And I think that, in its own right, was one of the things that also really aggrieved us as fans, was the fact that they knew that was a hit that deserved suspension, but they used the loophole in the league, which, it's not Cardiff's fault. If I was a Cardiff fan, I'd be saying, what a fantastic idea. But obviously there's that side of it. So I appreciate the idea of the retribution was paid when Jeff Wall fought him, but realistically, because of the sideshow that also ensued afterwards with regarding, what I personally felt wasn't a long enough suspension for a needless hit when they've conceded 7 goals and there's a couple of minutes to go on a skilled player, a blindside hit that concusses him and puts him out for so many games.
Absolutely.
Obviously, there was that side of it as well. So, whilst what happened was obviously pretty nasty, but obviously that to me is one of the reasons personally why I think that it was billed as going to be, Tyson Marsh is going to have to answer the bell with Cam Janssen.
Yeah, and I think certainly, and I've been pretty vocal on this on Twitter, so I'm not sort of saying anything new here, but I think DOPS really dropped the ball with that. They went through phases of explaining why people had certain punishments and how long it was, and producing videos, to not even bothering to explain why they'd reduced the punishment, not clarifying the reasons for it, which meant a lot of people felt very aggrieved. And then Marsh was obviously targeted as a result of that, partly obviously from his act, but also frustration with the way the officials were dealing with it and the way DOPS dealt with it.
Very true, very true. Well, if you've got anything that you'd like to say to us, then do get in touch with us on Twitter. Use the hashtag AskTCW. And we'll move on to another question now. And this one comes from Adam. And he asks Victoria, has your research shown that players who have just fought are more susceptible to making mistakes in their next few shifts as a result of the impact of repeated blows to the head?
It's not something that I looked at in terms of how I did my research. Certainly, from what I observed, not that I wasn't looking at that specifically, players who've had a fight are very keen to get back on the ice, but they also know their limitations of when they can. I saw more mistakes happen from players that had a big hit earlier in the game than those who'd had a sort of fair, willing fight.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Adam. A question for all of you now. Obviously, everybody's been following hockey in the Elite League for quite a few years. And we've had a question asking, who has been the best enforcer that you've seen in the Elite League? Tina, I'll let you go first.
Yeah. Ask the newbie first, why don't you? Well, in terms of actually, purely being an enforcer and doing that one particular job, well, I don't know. I mean, sort of. I know this is going to be a bit of a, she's a newbie and she doesn't know any better kind of answer. But I probably don't. But I think Cam Jansen was probably the best that I've seen. I think he did his job, and he was respectful to his opponents, and a lot of the time the phrase "he played the game the right way" has been attributed to him. So I don't think I could look too much further than that. I'll stick my black and gold tinted specs on. If, you can say I've done that if you like, but I think he was. I think he was good. I think he was a good player for us. He was a good player for the Panthers organisation, and I think he did what he did, and he did it in a very very respectful way.
Very true. Victoria?
Oh, I can probably tell you who I don't think was good easier than I could.
Okay, yeah, go for that.
In terms of an out-and-out enforcer, I don't think we have many in the Elite League. I think we have players who can play a decent shift, with the exception of perhaps Andrew Sharp, who I certainly wouldn't call a good enforcer, but who had that role entirely. Or McMorrow as well. I don't think either of those I wouldn't be able to call a good enforcer because they didn't have another role. I had a lot of respect for Jansen and the way he played, but similarly, and being from Cardiff originally, I'm going to mention that probably Brad Voth in his prime. I think he put a lot of fear in a lot of people, but he had a good game as well. And when he was on form, he first or second line player, good sort of offensive output, but nobody messed around when he was around on the ice.
I don't remember watching him play, but I do know he's talked about very fondly.
He's got the key. He's got the keys to Cardiff, hasn't he?
Yeah. From
he's the mayor of Cardiff.
Yes. He's the mayor of Cardiff. There you go. Andy, to finish it off, who's your best enforcer that you've seen in the Elite League?
That's a tough one, to be fair, because we've had quite a few very good ones. I think for all-round fear, probably Mel Angelstad. He was pretty tough. And was feared. I think personally for Panthers, I'd probably say, we've had the luxury of having quite a few good ones that tick boxes for various different reasons. I think Lepine was often overlooked as being a very good enforcer because he was so good defensively for us. I think, obviously, Jansen's been mentioned. I thought he was very good last year. I think Craighead, again, he didn't fight a lot when he was here, but he kind of didn't need to because he put the fear in people. I think one person who didn't necessarily have the size, but I know was was well respected in sort of fight terms and looking after players and being feared for pugilistic skills despite his size was Paul Ferrone. I've spoken to a few people before that have said that, you know, pound for pound, Paul Ferrone was probably the most ferocious fighter in sort of the ISL era, certainly, and I think he was about for a bit of the Elite League as well. But I'd probably mention those guys.
Just before just before you move on, sorry, I just want to give a little bit of a doff my cap to the Mayor of Belfast, Adam Keefe. I think
yeah.
You know, he's been around for a while, and you know they love him over there. He is a well-respected player, and rightly so, because he's another one of those guys that does what he does, and he does it very well, and he doesn't. I don't know. He just doesn't offend people with it. He just gets on and does it. So yeah, really, I like watching Adam Keefe play. I think he's a good guy.
Heartbeat of the side.
Indeed.
Okay, we'll move on to our final question because I know time's nearly caught up with us. But our last question is, what would be the feasibility of fighting with the gloves on? Do you think it would make a difference? Victoria, kick us off on that one for us, please.
Oh, that's an interesting one. How would you prevent them actually falling off mid-fight? I'm not sure what you'd have to do then, whether you'd have to stop it. I don't know. I don't think it's necessary. I think unless you're going to have specific gloves for fighting, like you would in boxing or something like that, you know, you're not going to be able to police keeping your gloves on. Gloves are designed to be able to come off quite easily. If you're going to throw punches, they're going to get lost mid-fight. And then how do you call that? You know, when do referees step in if someone just loses a glove? I can't see it ever happening. Doesn't bother me if players decide to keep gloves on. That's entirely up to them. But I don't see it being a rule.
No, I think it'd be, like you say, it'd be quite difficult to police as well. Like you say, they're designed to kind of fall off at that point, aren't they? Really, quite easily. So it doesn't seem feasible to me, like I just said. But well, that's our questions for tonight. Victoria, I will give you the floor for 30 seconds to do a little plug on Ice Guardians. So the floor is all yours for 30 seconds.
Excellent. I think you'll love Ice Guardians. I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. I think they took a really balanced view. The players that were in it seem to love it, which is great. I'm very pleased with the way they thought it through and planned it. I'm really honoured to be involved. Do come along and see it when it is in Nottingham. Hopefully we'll be able to announce a date later this week or the start of next week when it's going to be on. And then beyond that, when it's on download and Blu-ray in the new year, then I hope you'll enjoy watching it. Oh, and feel free to follow me on Twitter as well. I'm at Silverwood VS and at Ice Guardians as well. And they'll have all the dates and all the information you need as well.
Okay, thank you very, very, very much for that. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Victoria. It's been really interesting talking about enforcers, Ice Guardians and fighting in general. We really do appreciate it. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Andy, thank you very much from you.
No worries at all. Apologies for ballsing
up. Tina, thank you very much, as always.
Pleasure, TTFN and all that.
Okay, that is it for this episode of the Ask TCW podcast. We will have some exciting news regarding next week's guest in the coming days, but for the time being, thank you very much for listening and goodbye.